Welcome to the Cambridge Tech Podcast, talking all things technology from the heart of the UK's tech capital. Here are your hosts, Faye Holland and James Parton.
I'm Faye.
And I'm James. So Faye, how was last week for you?
It was a good week. Obviously, we're together on Tuesday, so I think we had a really good recording session, some really good episodes coming up. Lots of bookings in the schedule already. So if you do want to get on the podcast this year, you'd best drop us a note at info@cambridgetechpodcast.com ASAP so we can get you booked in. So that was the start of the week. I did some work. I broke the back on a client project, which always gives me joy. You know, when you've got that momentous amount of work to do and you just get your head down and you get focused on it. So that was good last week. And then also on Thursday, I went to a collaborative session organised by Katie Tunser of Horizon 37, who many of our listeners will know. And it was about value creation in innovation programs. So I had the opportunity to go and I had the time to go. So I trekked over to Oxford and it was really good. Really, really interesting session with all different people from across the UK, from Southampton to Manchester, who run accelerators. We had some of the investment portfolio managers in there as well, talking about what they needed for their portfolio clients. So it was a really good session, you know, completely different, sitting there being a participant rather than running these things. So yeah, it was great.
Sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
Keen to maybe get some Oxford related content onto the podcast as well.
I met a fair few people yesterday, and obviously Katie is an entrepreneur in residence at the University of Oxford as well, so I'm sure we can make that happen. But what I will say is, and should we do a little one of our usual quizzes, how many roundabouts do you think I went over? So I went your route, Bedford, and then Milton Keynes.
Oh yeah,
and then across. So how many?
Did you actually count them then, did you?
Well, I actually Googled it because I thought it was that ridiculous.
I mean, if you went through Milton Keynes, then I'm guessing I'm going to go for 30. So
Google says 40 to 50 plus. And actually, I went through so many of them that even the sat-nav was starting to get bored. The chap on Waze who was giving me instructions, he's going, take the second turning at the roundabout, and you could feel the tension, and I had to do it twice there and back. So my goodness, we need East West Rail, please, ASAP.
Well, apparently roundabouts do keep the traffic flowing, so you know, I think that's
yeah, they will. I don't need to see one. If I can get through this week without a roundabout, that would be lovely. And anyway, so then I went and had the end of my week was with the lovely Emmy Nicol. No roundabouts were included.
Well, I'm going to use the roundabout as the best segue I've ever done on this podcast.
Oh, go on.
So I would love to have seen a roundabout because my car has been in for a service like for the whole week. So I've really missed driving. I've missed coming to Cambridge. I've missed seeing people. So I'm getting a little bit stir crazy having worked at home for a few days now. So it's definitely not for me. I know that.
Oh, well, welcome back to Cambridge this week then.
Yeah, but how about that for a segue? I was quite impressed with that.
I mean, honestly,
good,
impressive.
So, because of that, I've not really got any I didn't go to any events. I didn't see as many people as I'd like to have seen. But the highlight of the week was definitely my daughter's birthday. So happy birthday, Holly. And the rest of the week was really just catching up with the backlog after the chaos of the Trinity Bradfield Prize. So
the success of, do you mean?
Yeah, well, yeah, success/chaos, yeah. Chaos from my inbox.
Oh, madness. Well, I'm sure you can make up for it this week. Let's have a little competition and see how many you can get, how many people you can see this week.
No, I'm always going to lose that competition to you, so there's no point even trying that.
Yeah,
so
sorry about that. I will get better.
I will try.
Should we do news? We've got quite a lot of news today, so let's run through that. First up, we've got big planning news. A £3 billion war chest has been agreed to massively expand Cambridge Biomedical Campus as a world-leading hub for life science advancement. The Assets and Procurement Committee at Cambridgeshire County Council has agreed a partnership with Prologis to support the growth blueprint. It consists of 67 acres of land owned by the county council that's been put forward to allow the campus's next phase of growth, aligned with delivery of the UK's modern industrial strategy. The campus, many of you will already know, but for those outside the region, it's already home to leading institutions including AstraZeneca's global headquarters, Cambridge University Hospitals, NHS Foundation Trust, the Wellcome Trust and Cancer Research UK. And the ambition is for it to double in size whilst making sure it underpins significant economic, social and infrastructure benefits for everyone across Cambridgeshire.
New Quantum have opened a new trapped ion networking laboratory close to its existing R&D headquarters at the Browers building on the university's West Cambridge site. The facility will double the company's research infrastructure to accelerate progress towards distributed quantum computing. And simultaneously, New Quantum are seeking new hires. Tune in next week when we talk to VP of Product Development, Ed Wood.
Pierre Socker of Amadeus Capital Partners has been appointed to the Science, Industry and Translation Committee of the Royal Society. So Robin Saxby, founding CEO of Cambridge Superchip Architect ARM, is co-chair of the Science, Industry and Translation Committee. Amadeus said Soccer's appointment strengthened the bridge between frontier science and commercial scale as the UK enters a new deep tech super cycle. So congratulations to Pierre. Pretty much the appointment comes at a very important time for the UK innovation system, where policymakers and industry leaders are hoping to close this recognised gap between scientific discovery and commercial scale.
Gearset, a global leader in Salesforce DevOps, has unveiled a year of sustained revenue growth in 2025. The company achieved a 49% increase in new product adoption within its existing customer base and increased its global headcount by 10% and welcomed over 400 customers, bringing its total count to over 3,500. Driven by 37% revenue growth, Gearset's 2025 performance underscores a structural transition within the Salesforce ecosystem as organizations move away from fragmented toolsets in favor of an end-to-end enterprise-grade platform.
Cambridge-gated Luminance, global leader in legal-grade AI for the enterprise, has won a significant deal with the European subsidiary of Japanese company Ajinomoto Co. Luminance will enable Ajinomoto Europe to accelerate contract reviews, standardise processes and gain granular insight into business activity. As a result, the legal team will be able to focus more time on strategic priorities while ensuring consistency and risk mitigation across the business.
And finally, listeners will remember we spoke with Martin Rigby from Cambridge-based venture funder ET Capital Limited back in episode 136. And last week, they revealed the close of a £270,000 innovation fund, which aims to invest in up to 10 businesses by the end of the financial year, sourced from the University of Cambridge and other locally based accelerator programs. It's already working on its first 5 investments, so we'll definitely keep an eye on the developments there.
Yeah, that's great news. So now on to today's episode. Concr is a tech bio company providing predictive modelling solutions to enhance confidence and foresight about the therapeutic efficacy of existing and emerging cancer drugs. And now on to today's episode. Concr is a tech bio company providing predictive modelling solutions to enhance confidence and foresight about therapeutic efficacy of existing and emerging cancer drugs. So to tell us more, let's hear from Irina Barbina and Matthew Griffiths.
So Irina, Matthew, it's absolutely great to have you with us today. Thanks for joining us. Why don't we start by introducing yourselves? Irina, would you like to go first?
I'm Irina. I'm the CEO of Concr, which is a tech bio company using digital twins for precision oncology.
Hi, I'm Matthew. I'm CTO at Concr. I'm co-founder of Concr as well. And I lead the development of Concr's technology that we use to make these digital twins of cancer patients and integrate the technology from astrophysics as well.
Brilliant. So we're going to get into the detail of Concr shortly, but let's talk about your backgrounds first of all. Irina, where did your journey evolve from?
I was an academic for about 12 years and starting as a geneticist back in Ireland. And then I moved to London to basically do translational research, developing targeted therapies and translating all of that good genetics stuff into drugs. And then I realized that actually it's a lot more interesting to influence what research gets done. And I went into funding management and deployed some public funding, followed by venture capital funding. And then that brought me to Concr as I started kind of integrating further into the kind of entrepreneurial ecosystem and startups. I got in touch with the team and worked with them first as a consultant and then eventually joined them.
Oh, so I think there's things we will want to dig into there with how that came about. But Matthew, tell us a little bit about your background first of all.
Yeah, so I did my undergrad and PhD at Cambridge, so natural science and physics for my undergrad, and then PhD in computational chemistry, where I developed a range of simulation algorithms. And during my PhD, I started getting more interested in how you could use science and technology to more impact people's lives. And so through that, started getting more involved with entrepreneurial activities. And through that, got introduced to this incubator program called Deep Science Ventures that's based in London. So I joined that out of my PhD. And through that, met the co-founders of Concr. We founded Concr together through that program. And that's the genesis of where everything started pulling together. And that's where we found this astrophysics collaborators to build technology out to solve the key problems we saw in cancer.
So Irina, I want to go back to, you talked about the academic scientists, then VC, and then you met the people at Concr. So how did the role of CEO come about?
One of the Concr co-founders, Dr. Uzma Asghar, and I used to actually work together back in Institute of Cancer Research and the Royal Marsden Hospital. So it kind of came quite a full long circle where she was focusing on what she would like to see in the clinic, and then obviously co-founded Concr with the team. And then from my side, I was more interested to see how scientific discoveries can be scaled and adopted. And I was very much driven by adoption. So we were just having a coffee one day, and this is how the conversation happened. And I consulted for the team back in 2020, maybe, quite early on in the kind of conception of the company. And then we just kind of shaped certain things together, and I kept getting more and more involved. And I realized how much can be done and how powerful this technology could be. And I'm also really interested in convergent science and using tech from one field and apply it to another. And I just love that. So I was really keen to get involved, and the CEO thing just happened as the company was evolving. So very, very happy to join them.
And it is a very different route, isn't it, to many CEOs?
You certainly don't plan for these things.
No, but it's a great way because you actually worked with the company first of all to then know exactly what they were doing, and you got to help at a stage where they're going to start to grow.
Definitely, and I think we learned a lot from each other as well, because I do not understand astrophysics. I had to learn a lot about gravitational lensing, which I'm sure we'll probably touch on. And it was just a really exciting time to join as well in that ideation space. And where do you take the product? What does the product look like? And so for me, and I think for everybody else, it's quite an interesting phase to get involved. And if you bring all these different disciplines together, great things can happen.
Perfect. Thank you. Matthew, it's your job now to explain what it is that Concr does and give us this little introduction into where the astrophysics bit directs what Concr actually does.
The core problem that Concr was really founded to address is this idea that in cancer, the way that data and models are used in general is very siloed and fragmented. So you have lots of work that gets done in the preclinical space in terms of understanding how to kill sort of cancer cells in a petri dish. Then you have clinical trials work where you start testing these compounds and therapies. And then you have actual clinical practice and real world data. When founding the Concr, we identified that there's a lack of technology and also business models in terms of pulling all that kind of data and understanding together to get really complete understanding of how cancer biology works and so fundamentally like how that's going to result in better patient outcomes. And so the question is, there's a technical challenge of how do you integrate that data, and that's kind of where the astrophysics technology comes in. And then there's the business side, which Irina does a very good job of in terms of actually how do you build a company to solve that problem. And so in terms of the technical challenge with bringing together all these disparate data sets is like we see two kind of core blockers. One is that data in cancer is incredibly complicated. There's all sorts of different kinds of data you collect, but generally for most data sets you're interested really important bits of data are missing, it's sparse, messy, and all that kind of stuff. And the other side you have with cancer is that it's actually really difficult to know what's going on, even if your cancer drug has worked, for example. For a patient, you might have response data, but often you won't. And even if you do have the response data, it's not that well associated with overall survival. And so you might also then have overall survival data, and often that just tells you that the patient survived 3 years, but you don't know if they die after 4 years or something like that. And even if you do know the outcome of the patient, it doesn't actually tell you why the cancer drug worked. And so there's this deep uncertainty about understanding just what's happened. And that makes it very difficult to build models in general. And so there's this need for basically better methods of dealing with this uncertainty, particularly when it comes to the outcome, but also there's uncertainty in terms of the inputs because it's so messy and complicated. And so the answer to that is Bayesian inference is like a pretty commonly used technology to solve that. The challenge is like deploying it at the scale that you need in cancer. And so when it comes to astrophysics, the equivalent problem they face there is they're trying to understand how dark matter works in the universe. And one of the key tools they use to study this are strong gravitational lenses. And that's when you have a galaxy that's almost directly in front of another galaxy. And so the gravity of the foreground galaxy bends the light of the background galaxy around it. You end up with these rings or spots of light around that foreground galaxy that have been bent by the mass of the foreground galaxy. And so then you can build a simulation in the astrophysics case to try and model the distribution of matter in the foreground galaxy, and then you can resolve an image of the background galaxy. And they're trying to understand things about the density of dark matter in that galaxy, but they can't directly observe it. They have to build a complex simulation. And in the same way, for a patient, we might be able to see maybe that the patient survived 3 years, maybe they've had a partial response to treatment. And we want to be able to actually go, okay, what actually happened to that patient in terms of how has the treatment actually worked for them? So you start needing to do relatively complex simulation for a patient, or even it can be difficult when looking at the cancer cell in Petri dish in terms of understanding how a drug has worked there. It can be quite complicated understanding that data because of the noise in that data. So you end up needing this thing of building a relatively complicated simulation for just like an individual patient, but you need to be able to link that to actually, okay, for another patient with similar features, how's your drug going to work? So there's this sort of idea of a hierarchical simulation where you're trying to understand, in the astrophysics case, how does dark matter behave in the universe? But you have these individual images of these strong gravitational lenses, and they have thousands of these images now. And so you have to build like a complex simulation for each one, but link that to this kind of more global model to understand sort of cosmology. And in cancer, we have the same kind of challenge if we have tens of thousands of patients where we have some idea of how the treatment might have worked for that patient, but it's not complete. So you need to build a more complex simulation for each patient, but you ultimately want to link that to this grand digital twin model that allows you to then simulate for every patient how different treatment choices are going to affect the outcome.
Technology moves fast, and now so can you. Discover Polestar, the all-electric performance brand vehicles redefining how we drive. Precision engineering, minimalist design, and software that evolves with you. Experience it at Holland Group in Norwich and Bury St Edmunds, or let us bring the test drive to your door. Proud sponsors of the Cambridge Tech Podcast. Polestar, electric performance redefined. Discover at holdengroup.co.uk/Polestar.
Okay, I have to say, I was somewhat nervous about how that explanation was going to go, but that was absolutely perfect. You really explained it so very well. Before we go into any more detail on actually building the data sets and how replicable they are, I have a burning question I have to ask beforehand. You knew that that was going to help what you needed to do with cancer. I mean, did you just sit down and go, they've got that problem with dark matter, surely that could help us? How does that conversation even happen?
It was actually an entirely chance conversation. In one of the co-working spaces we were based at, there was a freelance programmer who did work for these astrophysicists. And so just in the sort of social mixing events they had, we met this programmer And he made this connection that we're solving quite similar problems. And as we got sort of down into it more, we found these like really deep connections in what we're doing. So it was, again, completely chance kind of encounter, but very, very powerful one, right?
You talked, Irina, about convergence of technology. That's a prime example, and it is those chance encounters that often lead to the best solution. You obviously have come up with this approach. How replicable is it? Is it a case of you put the simulations, the algorithms together, and then you can replicate them? Or because there are so many different types of cancers and patients are different, a bit like the cosmology example, how do you map an entire... Is it just constantly evolving?
It is constantly evolving. One of the kind of core principles of how we're building this model is that there's a lot to learn from similar problems. So there's a lot of shared biology across different cancer types. Often treatment's the same across different cancer types. And there's often a lot of shared sort of pathology in terms of what mechanisms might be driving specific cancer types. There are, of course, cancer types which lack things in common, but you can learn a lot across these different situations. There's whole classes of drug that behave in similar ways, so you can learn from a different drug in the same class. And so that's kind of one of the core principles, is that you can, by allowing the model to learn across these sort of broader generalities, it significantly increases the amount of data that you can train these models on, the depth of biology that it can then learn from. That means that you get better performance in the situation you care about, because the problem you have with cancer is that you often care about a very specific cancer type with a very specific treatment. And there won't be a lot of data for that combination, but there might be a lot of data in other cancer types for that treatment, or that cancer type with different treatments. And so it's like, how do you link these things together? That's sort of one level in terms of how we're approaching it. I guess there's the more general thing of the approach, and ultimately it's about hierarchical simulation. So like you have this multi-scale kind of problem of understanding sort of the broader level sort of features of what drives response or something. And then these individual kind of patient level simulations or galaxy level simulations you have. And so in problems where you have these kinds of complex hierarchical structure, likely it could apply, but sort of cancer is a big enough problem that we have to devote 110% of our time just trying to solve that one, right?
So you have this amazing AI-driven technology, but I guess your challenge is how to productize it. How are you approaching that? I believe you have some proof of concepts running with customers.
Yes, that's right. And I think the starting point there is that the company was founded with a need, and it was logical progression to focus on that need. And the ability to predict how individual patients are going to respond to a given cancer therapy, rather than how an average patient is going to respond to a cancer therapy, is really powerful, both naturally in healthcare setting where a clinician is making a treatment choice, but also in drug development where, especially now with cancer therapies becoming more and more targeted, clinical trials are getting more and more difficult to carry out. And that's why the ability to essentially compare how a given patient on the trial will respond not only to the experimental therapy, but also to a standard of care alone using their digital twin allows you to estimate what is the benefit. And if you can do it for a patient, you can do it for a cohort of hundreds of thousands of patients. So quite early on, we're able to predict the benefit of a novel therapeutic compared to the current standard of care, and therefore inform what the next steps should be, which is the added value to a drug developer. So where we have found kind of commercial success is in cases where either it's a biotech with a single asset or a handful of assets who don't have the resources of big pharma to carry out all the clinical trials and fail. So they inform all the next steps using simulations, in silico simulations as well as digital twin simulations. So that has been our commercial route, but also that allowed us to gather that validation evidence that we can bring forward so that we can connect drug development with care in a much more effective and patient-centric way.
Absolutely fascinating. So how do you actually know it's going to work? How do you validate what it is and what it is you're developing?
Where we started our validation is using retrospective data sets, so simulating clinical trials that already have read out, for which there is already a result. So we simulate those clinical trials as if it were a prospective study. So we would take baseline characteristics of patients and then model out what the outcomes would be and then compare the results of our predictions to the actual outcomes. So that gives us a measure of accuracy of our prediction. And we've done that now for 17 different clinical trials across different cancer types. And we have consistently predicted the correct outcomes of clinical trials. I think there was one where we didn't. And so the accuracy is about 94%. And I think in that case, correct me if I'm wrong, Matthew, we thought it was an underpowered study. So where we simulated the same study design, but with more participants, we actually were able to detect a signal. But because the actual trial only recruited 70 or 140 patients, so 70 per arm, we thought it was underpowered. So the model predicted that it didn't collect correct information in order to make a decision. Other thing to add is that we actually have prospective validation. But of course, the massive proof will be to be able to do this prospectively. We've got one commercial study ongoing with a pharmaceutical partner, which will give us that answer, as well as 2 studies that we have with our clinical partners in the NHS. So with NHS Christie in cancer of unknown primary and the Royal Marsden Hospital in triple negative breast cancer.
That's really impressive. Not only the validation, but the commercial viability of it. So well done. Where are you up to in terms of team development, organisation, hires, those types of things?
We are still quite a lean team, and we do expect to expand following our next raise. So far, we are spread across kind of the technical team and clinical advisors who advise us with what the clinicians actually want to see, because without the uptake by clinicians, a lot of this just doesn't work in pharmaceutical as well as in the healthcare world. And we are building out our board of advisors, so bringing people with diverse expertise across the value chain, so not just clinicians and researchers, but also payers and regulators. And because it's a fast-moving, quite a changing world, and regulators have new announcements coming out every month, so we have to stay on top of that. So we're still working with a lot of consultants and different teams who provide different areas of expertise. But following the next raise, we'll be looking to expand not just the tech teams, but also the operational and business teams as well.
And do you think you will employ those people, or will you came into the company as an external supplier? Do you think you'll carry on with that model?
I think in the early stages, it's inevitable because, I mean, that's just the nature of startups. You are wearing multiple hats, and it's very natural to fill the skill gaps with consultants. I would expect that as we begin to grow and scale, we would be hiring full time.
You mentioned then that you have a fundraise in plan. So you've already got a very impressive selection of investors from the early stage round. So where are you up to, and what's your timeline?
Yes, we've been really lucky to get such really strong supporters early on. And we've got now investors from pharmaceutical world, oncology specific world, and tech and academics. So that's been great in informing not just the product strategy, but also what the investment strategy should look like. And so we are currently fundraising our growth round and looking to, again, keep that international investor base between US, UK, and Europe, as well as Australia, because we have a subsidiary in Australia as well. So yeah, continue to build in those regions.
It's been a tough fundraising environment. So how are you finding those conversations? You know, where are you getting the most interest, for example? Is it internationally or is it domestically in the UK?
I would say it's equivalent. Everything comes in cycles, and fundraising is never easy. There is a lot of, I think, strategic interest in the UK. Naturally, AI and life sciences is very strong in the UK, and therefore funding follows. So we, again, have been lucky to secure Innovate UK funding to develop some of these trials that I mentioned. So I do expect that we will continue to look domestically for investors. Europe has certainly increased activity in the space. And there are already really good examples across Europe where these technologies are being developed and early evidence being supported. So it's natural to look in that direction. And because we already have US investors, again, it makes sense to kind of expand and build on those networks. But I'd say interest is everywhere, and because it is a really appealing space. And there is still a lot to do. So it's not a case of we have developed it and it's now a matter of selling. This is the kind of technology that will continue to evolve, and we're kind of building with future in mind so that the more tests become available, the more developments that are on the market, we can leverage all of that information and integrate all of it for the benefit of the patient. So it will only get better, I think, in time.
So I guess the big call to action from being on the podcast is for those interested in potentially investing to reach out.
Always, I think, as from my position, that's always the case. But also people who are working across the ecosystem and who are interested to try new things, especially from the academic side and clinical side. We're always keen to hear opinions and what works and what doesn't work. Perhaps there are use cases or examples we're not aware of. So we're always really happy to chat and see how we can inform our product strategy going forward.
Thank you so much, both of you, for your time today. It's been really interesting talking with both of you. Where can we direct people to if they want to find out more?
Well, the best place is really to go to the website or find us on LinkedIn and follow us.
Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Today's show was produced by Joe Donaghy of Cambridge TV and supported by our media partner Business Weekly. The Cambridge Tech Podcast is available on all major podcast platforms and on cambridgetechpodcast.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please give it a 5-star review. It'll really help others discover the show.